She had one.
Is that the one?
Leather chairs. Got everything for Rabbi? Dirt all over my pants.
No. Well, we don't know who's going to
Slightest difference of words, maybe. Just difference in meaning. You do. You know what? Your hair is finished. She looks great in the black and white sweater, and at the last minute she said, "No, I want this one." And it was the right choice. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that worked out. He was so glad. I got to see them for the first time too the other day in Nashville, and he walked on stage, and I just went, and then Sierra like turned and looked at me, the artist, and she was just like, "Yeah, shout out for Jason." Well, she shouted out for Jason, and I yelled for Jason.
Thank you. We unintentionally matched.
Oh, you were wearing the same jacket.
We're not though. Like that's the thing. Same cut, same style, different material.
And you swear it wasn't planned. And neither one of us
I bought this 2 days ago. I didn't have black dresses that are not wedding dresses.
Back the coach. Yeah, and then I'll have everyone else. Yeah, they just
Greece. Yeah. Oh, right here. It's supposed to be good luck.
So Elizabeth is not. Maybe she can sing it when the family gets together.
Should be order of
How's it going?
Hey.
How are you?
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, okay. And those the grandkids that wish to swear come around and so she's just.
Very Thank you. How's your tequila?
So
You weren't there when I said what I realized Friday.
Yeah.
I've had 4 parents.
You said that you texted me.
Ordering here.
Any of the grandkids who wish to put this on, they do so. Oh. Yeah. See how it is in the Now, those of you who are going to wear the creos, go ahead and put on. So everyone else put it on the right side. Only the children on the left side. Anybody else wish to wear it? She's so perfect. You put on the other side. So you see a little tear at the very bottom of this ribbon. In the old days, they would either rip your lapel or your pockets. It's an expression for 70 years, and you and Henry had this love. But that love that you created is still here. Not only of children, but grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. Right? And so as we're here, it's when we spoke about so it was about a celebration of life. And yet we're sad, and the family is they've never had an experience without handwritten letters. Teach us that. So what words we're going to share, music we're going to hear, memories that we'll have. They are all just a part of these expressions. This tearing is perhaps the truest of all. So if you look at the very bottom, I'm going to tear it. Say with me. Anyone else need to do it? You good? You say with me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Dayan ha'emet. Praise are you, Adonai our God. Praise are you, Lord of the universe. It's a judge of truth, a righteous judge. You actually put this on the upper side.
Sorry.
It's a strange blessing. I'm going to stretch that tear out just a little bit. Just pull this up. Just pull it up just a little bit. It's a strange blessing, but it says it's true. It's true. All the things that you remember, all the memory that you have, thinking master. What's true? Well, they're absolutely true. And that immortal the parameters of our existence. That's true. That's not the only truth. Another truth as well. That's who you are. What you did with that life. Think about that. A musician, a husband, a lover, a giver. Lived his life on the highest of levels. That's the truth. The truth that you want. Though we tear it, the truth that we have, mortality that we face, something that transcends even life itself. It is the spirit that you are. So with that, you stay right here. We're going to have an escort to the graveside, and we'll begin the service. Okay.
I need 6 people. So you will be walking to the right side of the grave, and you will be walking to the left side of the grave. Yeah, once we get to the grave.
אומר קרא ומאמר קרא, כל בשר חציר וחום, חסדו חצית השדה, יעבד חציר נבצית, כי רוח אדוני נשמע בו, אכן חציר העם חציר נבצית, ודבר אלוהינו יקום לעולם, עצור תמים פועלו, כי קודם אחד משפט, אל אמונו בעיניו וצדיק וישר, עצור תמים בכל פעל, ויאמר לו תפעל, אשר לי במטה מעל, מיתם חייהם אל ריצ'ו ויעל, עצור תמים בכל מעשה, מיום מעלה תעשה, צדיק אתה אדוני להעמיד חיות, אשר בידך פתאום כל רוחות, חליל לך זיכרוננו למחות, יהיו עיניך ברחמים, עלינו בכוחות, כי לך אדון הרחמים, והסליחות. Please find a seat if you are able. Bob sent me a number of pictures. I was able to I had room for one to put on the cover, and I think I chose the best one because it was right in between his journey, and it was just a happy face for him. And the idea is for us to have a way in which everyone gets to express. There's a lot of people who are going to be sharing either in a memory or reading something very special that Henry would have loved, or we even have some music as well that we'll be playing. The idea is for everyone to be able to participate. So again, if there are some chairs, please fill them in. We wanted to ask everyone to share first in the front cover as we read responsibly. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him.
In the blowing wind and the chill of winter, we remember.
In the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, we will remember him.
In the blue of the sky, the warm summer, we remember.
In the rustling of leaves and the beauty of autumn, we will remember him.
In the beginning of the year and in the next, we remember.
When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember him.
When we are lost,
When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember him.
as long as we live, we do share.
The 23rd Psalm speaks of, again, a realization of our mortality. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And it's credited to King David who wrote it. Not to say that I don't have fear or that I am not aware of my mortality, but rather I'm going to live every day to its fullest. And it's a passage that has meant so much to people of different faiths. It begins in the Hebrew, Mizmor David. Adonai ro'i lo aksar b'no deshet yan b'tzeni. Amei min echod yan chedeni yan nafshi yoshavev. Yan cheni b'magalei tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elek b'geit zal mavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha, meshentecha, ema yanachamoni. Baruch lefanai shulchan neged torai deshanta b'shemen roshi chosira v'ya. Ach tov b'chetzi yedafoni kol yemei chayai v'shavti b'beit Adonai lo orech yamim. Let us read together in English. We say, a psalm of David. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God enables me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. God restores my soul and guides me in paths of righteousness for the sake of the divine. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. Those of you who don't live in Colorado, I know we have some New Yorkers, we have some California, some others. This is our spring, and then tomorrow will be our winter again, and then we'll have spring again. Every day is a new season. Traditionally, there were actually seasons that people could count on, and out east you have, in the fall there's beautiful colors, and but here every day is a guess. And our ancestors put together in Kohelet, in the third chapter of it, it's a passage which speaks of the seasons as a metaphor for the various chapters and stages of our lives. The Birds made a song out of it, and it's not classical music, but I'm a rock and roll fan. So it's To Everything Turn. You can still find it on your AM radio. It says, we read together. There's a season set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for grieving and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for refraining from embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping, a time for letting go, a time for tearing, a time for sowing, a time for silence, and a time for speaking. The tearing we did, the tearing of this ribbon that represents the tearing of our family, the loss of a loved one. So is in noting the memories that we have that are sewn and made a part of the fabric of our being. By the way, wind in Hebrew is ruach, means spirit. And so we will honor Henry's spirit and his ruach, and again, to weave the memories and the thoughts of this wonderful man into the fabric of your lives and this community. And Bob, if you will be the first to share your words, please.
I'm Bob Beckwitt. I just wanted to welcome all of you, including those who are connected through the live stream, for joining us today in the celebration of the life of my father, Henry Joseph Beckwitt. He has commonly been known in his life as Dr. Beckwitt, Hank, Dad, and Grandpa. And I wanted to start by sharing a number of things in his life that were wonderful memories and also challenging memories. And as I thought about these things, I realized I didn't really know that much about my father when he was young. But fortunately, there were three people that have known him since he was very young, and I had a chance to speak to them. His cousin Louis, his cousin Marion, and his brother Steve. As an aside, the relationship between cousin Louis and Dad was just extraordinary. They met when Dad was 4 years old and Louis was 3. They've known each other for 90 years. Louis was by Dad's side his entire life. He was his best man, and he talked to him not that long before Dad passed. So I'd like to start by asking the question, how did Dad come into this world? Well, it required two people, Grandma and Grandpa Beckwitt, Morris and Selma, to be born in the first decade of the 1900s. Grandpa was born in Poland, and he, as a young adult, immigrated to the United States, and thank God he did, because every single person who was a Jew in the town he lived when he was a young person was annihilated during the Holocaust. Grandpa and Grandma, Selma and Morris, would meet. They would decide to marry, and the result of that marriage was the fact that Dad was born on July 13th, 1930. And the 30s was a tough time to come into this life. There was a depression in the world that lasted for 10 years, the worst depression literally in history. It would affect so many people. And then that followed a world war. Now, Grandpa, he was working on Wall Street when the stock market collapsed. And amazingly, he kept his job for a while. And in that job, he wrote a market letter, so a signal of what I would eventually do. And at some point, though, he saw the writing on the wall and decided to quit that job and to take whatever savings he had left and buy a farm. And living on a farm at that time was really tough. Uncle Stephen told me this story about that farmhouse in which they lived. And he said that the insulation of the farmhouse was so poor that there'd be some days in the winter when he'd go to sleep with a glass of water next to him on his bedside, and he'd wake up in the morning and the water would be frozen. He and his brother David and Dad the three brothers, lived with their parents, and they needed to help them with everything on the farm, working before they went to school, when they came home on the weekends. It was nonstop for years. Now, when Dad turned 12, he got a driver's license, and that meant he got promoted to drive the egg route, which was to bring eggs from Bound Brook, New Jersey, to Brooklyn, where all their clients were. And there were lots of eggs. This farm had 5,000 chickens. Dad did this before he went to school. He did it on the weekends. It was extraordinarily difficult as a young adult into high school to have that type of life and still go to school. And yet Dad, being as brilliant as he was, he graduated the top of his class, which would qualify anyone to get into the greatest colleges in America, like Harvard and Yale and Princeton. But at that time, they weren't admitting Jews. And so he went to a local college, Rutgers, and excelled there. And then he decided to go into into medicine. And he went to New York University and excelled there. And then he had to make a decision on which hospital to go for residency. And he chose Bellevue Hospital in New York City. And that is likely to be the most important decision he ever made in his life. Because at that institution at the exact same time was a young woman, and her name was Anne San Gemino. Mom at that time was working as a nurse in the intensive care unit, taking care of premature babies. And she's been beautiful all her life, so you can imagine how many men were her suitors. In fact, she told me once about the story of this man who actually was in the hospital with, and she was taking care of her. She was taking care of him, sorry about the pronouns. And he professed his love for her, and he proposed marriage to her. And he happened to be the son of the Sugar King of America. His name was Spreckles. And so she could have married him and lived a life of luxury. But she said no to him because she wanted to find a man she could truly love. And so Mom and Dad met. Dad asked her out on a date, and then another one. And they would tell me that they would walk along the East River near the hospital, and Dad had a beautiful voice, and he would sing to her. He would sing Some Enchanted Evening, which was a beautiful song from the musical South Pacific that had just come out on Broadway. They fell in love. Dad asked her to marry him. She said yes, and then they went to talk to their parents. And then the next challenge came, which is that Dad was Jewish and Mom was Catholic. And in the 1950s, a marriage between those two religions just didn't happen. In talking to their parents, Mom's parents, Betty and Frank San Gemino got to know Dad. And they saw how extraordinary he was and how much in love Mom was. And so they consented. And then Grandma and Grandpa Beckwitt met Mom and so saw how extraordinary she was and how much in love he was. And so they gave their consent. So Mom and Dad on June 9th, 1956, went to the rabbi's office at Temple Emanuel in New York City and got married. And this photo here is from that day. Look at how beautiful they are. After their marriage, they had a swanky party at Sherry Netherlands Hotel, which I just found out because we actually found a photo in the album in front of that hotel. So life for them would begin, and they would live literally a marriage of almost 70 years. Extraordinary. But life as a young couple was tough. Dad was a senior resident making, any guesses, $75 a month. And Mom, actually as a nurse, made a little bit more than Dad did. But even with that income, they could barely afford an apartment. They lived in a high-rise apartment in the Bronx. And their apartment was so small that when Mom got pregnant with me, only one person could fit in the kitchen. Now, don't say the joke about the fact that it was me with a big head. You can imagine how difficult it was to live there when Rick was born too, the tightness of the space. He was born 2 years later. And then they moved to Illinois because Dad needed to serve in the Air Force and he took care of soldiers. And that's where Wendy was born. And then they moved to Colorado, and that's where Mark was born. So Mom and Dad in their early 30s had 4 young children. So the question is, why did Dad move his family to Colorado? Well, he had finished his training and he decided he wanted to go into academic medicine. And so there was a place at General Rose Hospital that was doing the earliest research on heart catheterizations, which is the idea of injecting a dye into heart vessels to see what's going on in them. First, they had to learn to do that with animals and then with humans. And then eventually, and Dad actually published some seminal articles on the subject. And then eventually down the road, surgeons were able to figure out how to, once they saw that fat in the vessels, to take it out so that people wouldn't have heart attacks. And my guess is that Dad's research and others led to literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of saved lives. What an extraordinary contribution to society. Dad loved research, but he loved coming home and being with his family even more. And I remember that time. We were living on Tucson Street, which is literally a mile and a half away from here. And we would walk to school, which was a block away, and come home in the evening and play, ride bikes, had so much fun. And then in the evening, we would come home to the safety and love of Mom and Dad and our dog Blaze. It was actually an idyllic life as a middle-class family in America. We were so lucky. But when I entered 5th grade, Dad suddenly realized he had a challenge, which was he had 4 smart kids who he wanted to go to college, but he had no money to help them go and no prospects for money because in research it didn't pay. So he made the ultimate sacrifice to give up his love of research and start a private practice. And doing that was extraordinarily hard. He had to wake up early in the morning and work all day into the evening. And then during the nighttime, he would get phone calls overnight from emergencies, and then he'd work weekends. It was like he was on the farm again. The benefit of it was that he had more money. He helped build this beautiful house that we've lived in all these years. We went to, in Cherry Hills, we went to Cherry Creek Schools, which is the best schools in the state. And when it came time to applying to colleges, that helped us get into those schools. And we had money so that Wendy could pursue her love of dance and become the great dancer that she became. And if he had not sacrificed for us, we may be in totally different places. And so we are so totally thankful for that sacrifice. The good news is that when Mark was finishing college, Dad suddenly realized that he doesn't have to work as hard. And so he started doing stuff for himself. He loved to sing, so he joined the Colorado Chorale and sang bass and baritone parts. Mom also joined later. And then they started to travel. First, they went to Europe, and then Asia, and then Latin America. They traveled everywhere in the world. And they got a map of the world, and they put it on their wall in their house, and they started putting little pins in all the places they traveled, and more pins year after year after year. Mark just recently counted all those pins. I don't know how long it took, but I'm sure it took a long time. And he counted that they had visited 75 countries and 400 cities in their 35 years of traveling. What a wonderful life these two led. There's a totally romantic situation with Mom and Dad traveling the world, seeing new places, sharing that experience, getting to know new people. I am so happy that they had that time together, literally a dream as a couple in this world. Their last couple trips, Dad and Mom would come to New York City to visit me at 87 and 88, and they get on the subway and ride the subway down and take to see a Broadway show. That was Mom and Dad. And then when they were 89, Dad said, I have this trip I'd like to do. I want to take a train across Russia and then follow it up with visiting the country of Iran. And they did it, and they had a wonderful time. And then COVID hit, and that didn't stop mom and dad. In the middle of Omicron, as it was spreading the world, mom and dad and 30 other people got on a plane down to the southern tip of Argentina, and then got on a boat and spent a month traveling around Antarctica. Antarctica, a place they had been 3 times before. They loved Antarctica. They loved it. So they loved the penguins. And my dad took thousands of photos of penguins that we have in this photo library. It was so beautiful. That would be the last trip they would take, because Dad's Parkinson started to make it hard for him to walk. And then, of course, we have the fall and breaking of his arm, and he had to go into the ICU. It was awful. We discovered this cancer, and he got so weak. At the beginning of last year, he went into short-term rehab, and he couldn't even stand up. And then I got to see another side of Dad, his bravery and perseverance. It was extraordinary. He would not accept that as a state of life. And so every single day, he worked as hard as he could to get better. First to stand up, then to stay standing up, then to take a couple steps, then to learn how to use a walker, then to walk out of the room with the walker, then walking down the hallway. Then he came home and he started walking on the driveway. Then he walked a little bit on the street, then all the way down the street and then back. And then he went to work with Charles at physical therapy, and he was walking on a treadmill, and he was walking 30 minutes on a treadmill in a 60-minute session. Extraordinary recovery. And the peak of the recovery was one day I was with him, and he stood up, and with Charles only holding onto the gate belt, Dad walked across the room without a walker. I was totally shocked that he was able to do that, but he did. And when he got to the other side of the office, he sat down and he looked truly happy. And he said something to the effect, "I think I feel like a real person again." I am so glad that Dad had that perseverance and bravery to get to that point. And then things turned down, and now he is gone. And the spirit obviously is around us, clearly. And I wanted to end by saying that Dad has been the most important person in my life. He has been the greatest mentor anyone could ever possibly have. Anytime I ever had something I had to figure out, I would say, what does Dad think to do? And then if I couldn't figure it out, I would ask him, and he'd give me the advice. And now that he's not here and I can't hear his words, I'm going to have to figure this out myself. And luckily, I have the example of the actions of his life to guide me. And so, Dad, I just want to say, I will love you the rest of my life, miss you every day. But I'm a spiritual person, and I believe that someday I will see him again. And so however long it is, however many decades that I live on this earth, I know that someday I will see you, and it will make me truly happy. Thank you.
Nick, will you come and share this passage from Shakespeare's Midnight Symphony?
My name is Nick. I am Mark Beckwitt's son. I'm going to be sharing a short passage from A Midnight Summer's Dream, Act 3, Scene 2. We, like two artificial gods, have with our needles created both one flower, both on one sampler, sitting on one cushion, both warbling of one song, both in one key, as if our hands, our sides, voices, and minds had been incorporate. So we grew together like to a double cherry, seeming parted, but yet an union in partition, two lovely berries molded on one stem. So with two seeming bodies, but with one heart, two of the first, like coats in heraldry, due but to one, and crowned with one crest.
Rick, will you please share? Hang on a second. I'm Rick, Bob's brother, Mark's brother, Wendy's brother. And I first want to start out by thanking you all for being here to help us remember Dad and to celebrate his life. Seeing you all here would put a big smile on his face because family and friends were everything to him. My older brother, Bob, gave you his thoughts and perspectives on Dad's journey through life. And I'd like to give you a few of my thoughts and memories. Dad was a very loving man. He was a humble guy. And he believed that through hard work and dedication, anything was possible. He said that he had a relentless work ethic and worked tirelessly to provide for us. He strove to instill that same drive in each of us, and that started at a very early age. Whether it was making our beds, shoveling snow, mowing the lawn, or doing his dreaded billing, we all learned what to do. What he wanted us to was to create that muscle memory. That working hard was a stepping stone to success. To that end, he very much believed that celebrating successes, even the small ones, would lead small victories to great accomplishments. He believed that no goal was out of reach, and if we did not strive for the best, then we were not tapping our potential. He called it untapped potential. And he was always there with motivation, love, and support when we needed a helping hand to tap that potential, and there when we stumbled. Bob, Wendy, Mark, and I have all accomplished great things because of his mentorship, leadership, and love. And I know he's extremely proud of each of us. He would revel in Bob's musical talents and achievements, as that was not far from his tree. He encouraged Wendy, Mark, and I to jump on that musical train. And we all participated somewhat reluctantly in that journey. Somehow I got to play the oboe, a double-reeded instrument that sounded like a duck. I hated that. But Dad was just so darn convincing. Wendy got to play the cello. Seeing her play that thing, it was bigger than she was. And the only thing that was worse is she was terrible at it. And Mark was stuck with the violin. At least it was small. Well, needless to say, none of us were any good. Bob had all that musical talent. And Dad's dream of us having a family orchestra slowly disappeared. And while he would joke about that, he knew that our passions were elsewhere. And he encouraged us to reach for our own stars. But inside, he was really, really pleased that his musical vision and dream would live on through Bob. And equally more important, through the next generation of families. Dad saw that Wendy had a gift for dance. Bob talked about this, and that was at a very young age. And he helped her map out that journey.
Bob, Mark, and I also reluctantly participated in this journey and attended more Nutcracker performances than any kid should have. But, you know, unlike Dad, we didn't really see the vision. We didn't see the dream. We didn't see the potential as she was jumping up and down on the stage wearing a reindeer costume. But Dad did, and wanting the best for her, he helped her start her career in Chicago and then in New York. But, you know, let's don't be kidding ourselves. He was really, really sad when she left home. But Dad was all about selflessness and doing what was best for each of us. With Mark and I, Dad had other challenges. We didn't have a passion for the arts. We weren't his best students, but he recognized that we had a unique personality, a gift for humor, an ability to create strong relationships and friendships. And he believed that that would open doors to great opportunities for us. Dad very much believed and told us that there were many paths to Rome. And he was always there when Mark and I would walk in circles, trying to find that city. But with his help, we ultimately got there. And I think it was those early expeditions that we had trying to find Rome that led to Mom and Dad's passion for travel. One of his favorite adventures was when Mark was a bartender. He loved hearing Mark's stories and hearing his jokes. He would then try to retell the jokes, and he was not good at that. He also loved when Mark wore his bartender badge, Nick Danger. He just got a huge chuckle out of that scene, and seeing Dad laugh was one of the best things. But Mark, in all seriousness, he was very proud of the man he became. I think perhaps prouder of you as a loving father, son, and husband than any of us. And for me, Dad was always there to provide that never-ending guidance and encouragement. And after all, I was the middle child. And as you know, because I've told you all so many times, he loved me more than you. He was always there when I crashed and burned. And he helped me reach that next star. I would spend hours and hours on the couch in his library as he would help me try to figure out what I wanted to do with life. And there was no escape because the library was right next to the front door and the back door. And I couldn't enter or leave that house without him wanting me to sit on that couch. Dad was waiting no matter how late. I hated that couch. There was nowhere to go. But as I look back on my life and the things that I've achieved, those early morning and late night sessions were the best thing that ever happened. We all have so many vivid memories of Dad. Some really good, a little mixed, and some not so much. His mashed potatoes were legendary. And having the opportunity to lick one of those mixing beaters was the best thing for us as kids. We would fight over them. And watching the way he stuffed Mom's turkey and then surgically sewed that bird back up, and that was magical. The joy in his eyes when he was done was only matched when he saw me do the same thing for my kids. And probably more than anything, his face would lit up when the whole family was together, and he just had such an infectious smile. Well, for the mixed memories, these were all things that started out great, but then turned somewhat not so great. We all loved taking the station wagon on camping trips, pitching a tent, lighting a fire, and then roasting marshmallows. Dad would help us find that perfect stick. Well, that was magical until Bob caught my shirt on fire with his flaming marshmallow. And Dad had to become a fireman and back to the rescue. For the time when Dad was cooking steaks on our barbecue, he really reveled in the fact that he was an incredible barbecuer. The steaks were done. He called the family together. We all came in, and only to find out that our dog Blaze had already gobbled them. But one of my personal favorites was when I bought my first car. Before my senior year at college, my best friend Steve and I found this old VW van that was used as a delivery truck. I told Dad it was a great investment and that it would help with the chicks. But he was not too happy with the idea and suggested that I buy something more practical. Needless to say, he lent me the money, and Steve and I bought the car together, and it cost us about $500 in total, $450 in total. We drove the hell out of that car when we were in Beckwitt, California. We drove the car back to Colorado. And as we were driving back, and I got there, I said to Dad, I want to buy Steve out. And he said, well, if that's the case, I need to do an inspection. He walked around the van, pointing out all the rust. He tried all the gadgets and then took it for a test drive. He comes back about 5 minutes later. He tosses me the keys. He said, I wouldn't buy Steve out. Well, I really had my own idea about what was life. And I borrowed another $225 to buy the car. A few days later, packing the car up for California, loaded up, Dad comes out, gives us the typical goodbye hug, and he hands me a piece of paper. And on that paper, it had the USAA towing service, toll-free number. And he just was laughing as he handed it to me. Well, I wasn't daunted by that humor. I got in the car, drove it, and was probably at the top of my spiritual high. And that ended in Las Vegas or in the desert somewhere when the engine blew up. And I had to hitchhike to the next town. Well, I got robbed on the way to the town. I get to a payphone. Luckily, I had some change. And my first call was to USAA. And my next call was to Dad. And first thing he said is, Rick, are you okay? And I said, yeah, Dad, I am. And he said, well, thank God. And then he said, just laughing, he said, you know, I was expecting it and I told you so. He said, you know, I think this is one of those great life lessons. And he paused for a little bit. I said, Dad, I needed another $270 to tow the car out to California. And he thought for a moment and he said, well, you think Steve wants his share back? And after that, he said, you know, I wouldn't spend the money. Can't you just take the plates off and leave it on the side of the road? Well, that was a great experience. It was a mixed one. Now for a few of the moments that I feared. Topping the list, and I think we talked about this a little last night, was the powdered milk. His powdered milk was just god awful. And he took such great about the dreaded haircut and brandishing his Gillette electric razor to give us haircuts, buzz cuts. But he knew all of our hiding places cut because we fidgeted too much. Someone would get burned if they were the last one getting cut because the blades would be too hot. But that was one of his specialties. Unfortunately, Mom convinced him later on that the scissor bowl cut was the better of the alternatives as we progressed to be a little bit more racy. But while I hated those moments, you know, those two were really an expression of his love. But all these things, they really pale in comparison to the one key lesson that Dad taught us. And that was the importance of family and in finding that right partner to share your life with. Dad loved Mom with all of his heart. And Mom, you were the center of his universe. While he was extremely proud of all the things that he did to raise us, he knew that your fingerprints were everywhere. And he was so proud of what you did to help him. You were the yin to his yang, that counterbalance that he needed to make it through life. And together, working hand in hand, both of you built a home with a strong family foundation. And on that foundation, each one of us kids have built our lives. And that circle continues. Dad, I can't express how much I love you and will miss you. I would not be the husband, the father, or the man I am without your hard work, guidance, and love. I will forever be thankful that you were my dad.
Hi, I'm Barbara, and Hank was my father-in-law. And Colin and Elizabeth, who are Bob's children, are also my children. And before I play, I just wanted to say a few things because I have had 4 parents in my life, obviously my birth parents and Hank and Ann, and they were the ones that welcomed me the most and were really the parents that are the most important to me, and especially Hank. And I love being welcomed into all of your family, and I love you all, and I'm so sad, and I'm glad that, especially because he and Ann love traveling, which I also do, and all the times I was able to travel with them were such a joy. And thank you. So I'm going to use my son as a music stand, and what I'm going to play is an arrangement of Amazing Grace. Yeah, that's right. And it was done by Wendy's son Callum. So even though he couldn't be here today, he's here in spirit. Doesn't like sitting in the sun.
Thank you, Barbara. Jack, will you please share next?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jack. I am Hank and Ann's eldest grandchild. I have so many wonderful childhood memories from which that I wanted to share some, and they typically all resolve around holidays, Thanksgiving, so many just wonderful times together as a family. Because as everybody has alluded to earlier, family was what was most important to Grandpa, what was most instilled in his children, and coming together as a family around a meal for Grandpa was probably one of the best combinations that he could ever have. Anybody that doesn't know Grandpa, if you put a plate of food in front of him, it might take a little while, but let me tell you, he's going to return it, and it's going to be as clean as when that plate came out of the cupboard. And he's the only person that rivaled a child's appetite at the dinner table growing up. Apologies, I went a little bit off page there. I moved out to Denver about 5.5 years ago, primarily because I wanted to be closer to family. My parents live in the state, and then my grandparents being nearby was absolutely a calling for myself coming out to the state. And I cherish all the times that we spent together. A lot of great memories with Grandpa listening about his medical practice days, him introducing me to classical music, which, admittedly wasn't really my biggest draw, but I learned so much from him. And, just the wonderful dinners that we would have sporadically over the last 5 years, making pizza, the countless takeout Chinese meals as we experienced just over the last day. But one specifically fond memory was cleaning out the basement. I definitely obtained my pack rat tendencies from Grandpa, but it was such a fascinating process going through so many items in that basement and just learning what could be thrown out, what couldn't be thrown out. And the reason being, every item down there had a memory, a key event associated with it, whether you're picking it up and you're just seeing a newspaper stack and you're like, what is going on here? Like, no offense, there's nothing remarkable in this newspaper. And he would just share the most fascinating tidbit. I was in this location, I picked it up, and he could recount it just off the top of his head. And it fed into the love that he had for his family, because it was all family centric driven. Wendy was at X location, sent me this postcard. The number of memories to that extent were just fantastic. I want to finish by saying that, I'm so glad that everybody's here. He'd be so happy that, we're celebrating his life, and, I love everybody here. I love Grandpa, and he'll be missed. I miss you. Bye.
Thank you. Andy?
Thank you, everybody, for coming today. It means so much to him, and it's wonderful to see so many people. I'm Wendy, his little girl. Okay. When I think about my dad's life, I keep coming back to one thing: his endless patience and kindness. Growing up with 3 extremely loud brothers wasn't easy, but my dad always made me feel heard.
I remember him picking me up from ballet after long shifts at the hospital. Sometimes it was literally so late that the school would be turning off the lights. He must have been so exhausted, but he never showed it. On those drives home, he made me feel like he had all the time in the world to listen. We talked about everything, big things, little things, my dreams of becoming a dancer. And when the time came for auditions, he took me everywhere, New York, Pennsylvania, California. Never once did he complain. All my life, his patience and belief in me gave me courage to do things that should have scared me. Moved to New York at age 15, become a ballerina, become a mom in a foreign country. Even when I didn't know it, he was looking out for me. Just recently, I found letters he wrote on my behalf when I was 18 and living and dancing in Utah. I'd just been denied a credit card for some ridiculous reason. He wrote a long and furious complaint to the bank. And when that didn't work, he then wrote to the Federal Reserve, demanding they change their policies. On that same trip, I also discovered something else. He kept every acceptance letter from every dance school I'd ever auditioned for. And even more touching, he saved every letter I ever wrote him while I was abroad. I didn't go to college or to medical school, so knowing he was proud of me, that he was quietly cheering me on, my whole life means everything. My family are gutted they couldn't be here today due to the distance. But when I asked them what they loved most about my dad, they all said the same thing: the endless time and patience he had for them. Callum remembers my dad sitting for hours listening to him play the violin. Finley remembers him flipping through study note cards before his exams and spending absolutely ages trying and failing to teach him to shuffle cards. Lily remembers having a bad cough and watching in amazement as my dad, like a magician, pulled out a series of stethoscopes and medical instruments from his seemingly bottomless suitcase and gave her a full checkup. Of course, my children did not always appreciate this quality at the time. Once Dad spent hours showing each of the children a slideshow of safari photos, pausing to analyze the same tiger from 20 different angles. First, he showed Lily. Well, then it was Finley's turn. Finally, it was Callum's turn. They went up to Callum's bedroom. They get about to slide 4 of 1,000 before I hear Callum bolt down the stairs and say, "Boring." But times have changed. As my children have grown up, I've watched them become more and more like my dad, not just in their love of travel, but in their kindness and quiet attentiveness towards others. It's a quality I've seen in my brothers too, in the way they've dropped absolutely everything to look after our parents. It makes me so happy and so proud to see the qualities I love most in him be passed down through the generations, and I know he would feel the same. He was an absolutely incredible father, a devoted granddad, and a lifelong cheerleader. He shaped all of our lives in more ways than we can ever say or thank him for. All we can do now is try to carry that kindness and patience forward today and every day. From the bottom of my heart, Dad, I love you so much. Lucky doesn't cover it.
Hello everyone. I'm Cassidy. I am Rick and Barb's daughter, and I guess would be remiss to say I'm Anne and Hank's eldest granddaughter. I will be reading a passage from Life in the Woods by Henry David Thoreau. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut with a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms, and if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it, and publish its meanness to the world, or if it were sublime, to know it by experience and be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Beckwitt. Mark, the youngest, the best looking, the funniest. But, you know, I have some incredible siblings, and so I had to find these, you know, falsehoods to live on so that I could keep up. But and Rick alluded to it too. I always thought of myself as the comedian in the family, and many times I use my humor at all the wrong times. And this one won't happen to be one of those because I truly believe in humor to lift up. And Rick is, Bob and Rick and Wendy, they've shared great stories. I'm only going to bother you with two. Not bother you. I'm going to limit it to two ones that are especially endearing to me because they go to two things that were really core to Dad, you know, and things I've picked up from him. One was his, you know, and Bob shared that he grew up at the heart, one of the hardest times, and that, you know, there was no money. And he tried to teach us this true value of money. And one of the ways he did that was by the weekly allowance, right? And so for the pleasure to get whatever we could try to gather from that, we had to keep a strict accounting of the spend of our weekly allowance in order to get the next week's allowance. And so my earliest memory of this is going to him and asking for a weekly allowance. And he says, okay, so what are you thinking? And I said, well, I probably threw out some number because I didn't know anything about negotiating at that time. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But he asked me, what would I use it for? And I said, well, Dad, milk is 6 cents a day, or 6 cents a carton. And I drink 3 of them at lunch. And he says, okay, so there's 18 cents. And so over a week it was that. And he said, okay, I'll give you 90 cents a week. Well, that didn't allow anything besides milk. So eventually we wound up at $2. I don't know how, but each week I would come in on the Sunday asking for my next $2, and I'd have to present my ledger with precise spending, right? Because it couldn't be, you know, that I just spent it. He wanted to know what I spent on, because at the end of the day, he was trying to teach us about the value of money. Like, you brought a candy bar, or you bought this. Was that really needed? And oh, by the way, what he really wanted at the end of each week is that you come to him with money left over, not with empty pockets, just asking for $2. Now, what I need to get back to is that unintended benefit he gave me in that earliest memory of negotiating, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what I do for a living. My job is all about negotiating. And so I was horrible at it then. I learned over time about negotiating what my lawn mowing rate was, or my billing typing rate. So Dad, thank you for that. You didn't know you were giving me a career, but you did. So thank you very much. One more story for you, because again, I could go on for a while, but I'm not going to do that. Dad was all about learning, and Rick and Bob and everybody's alluded to that. He was always there to help teach, right? And I remember distinctly when I get far enough ahead in mathematics that the teacher would actually allow us to bring a calculator to school, because we had learned all the basics and it would help us be better students in order to get to things faster. So I go to Dad saying, Dad, I can finally use a calculator in class. Can you help me buy one? He says, sure, son. Sure, Mark. I'd love to. And so did we go out and buy a great Texas Instruments or an HP 12C? No. From his drawer, he pulls his drawer open and he pulls out a slide rule. And he says, first you got to figure this thing out. And then I will get you a calculator. So he taught me how to use a freaking slide rule. And by the way, thinking retrospectively, it was way cool. But you can imagine at that time, going to school with the critical nature of kids, walking into math class and needing to pull out my calculator, which I did, a slide rule in, I think it was high school, whatever it was. But you can imagine the razzing I took from that day and for on. But then again, I learned something that, it was a process to get to something. And then, he gave me, he eventually bought me that calculator and I could go the easy route. So just two stories about Dad and his endless pursuit to give us, the sense of value and that sense of learning. That was, besides family, those are two of the, core things that Dad was all about. We will use them every day. We passed them to our kids. They're going to pass them to their kids. And by the way, all these stories, I can't wait to hear them in 20 years because they're going to become way more exaggerated and cool than they are now. So everybody, we all loved him. We all think of him every day. And Dad, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. At least it wasn't an abacus. Colin.
Not want to stay up. Write them down like that. These have all been really touching tributes and memories. It's really going to be, I think, quite hard to follow everything that's been said. So I'm going to try my best. I find it fitting that Grandpa was a cardiologist. The heart serves many important functions, pumps oxygen and nutrients to the rest of our body to sustain us. Its regular rhythm provides structure to our daily lives. And most importantly, many believe it to be the source of our loving and caring nature. In a nutshell, Grandpa embodied all of these essential roles of the heart in his long life. As a cardiologist, he contributed extensively to the early development of cardiac catheterization, as you heard from my dad. Trust me, I've searched his name in Google Scholar, and his publications are quite impressive. He also cared for patients both in the clinic and the ward. His whole career was about nurturing others. And being a physician is not easy. It's emotionally tolling to empathize with patients at their hardest moments. The hours and procedures can be physically demanding, and it requires intellectual precision. Fortunately for Grandpa and his patients, he excelled and was able to touch so many lives. Just to share a letter that one of his former patients over 45 years ago in writing to him, this really describes how caring of a physician he was. He wrote, "During my 6.5 months as a semi-resident, the entire hospital staff treated me with friendly courtesy and understanding. God bless them. And then there was a doctor. Not just any doctor, a highly skilled physician who worked 7 days a week. A patient man of compassion who found time in a busy schedule to talk to the family with concern and understanding. Thank you seems so inadequate, but thank you from the bottom of my heart." Isn't that inspiring? I sure thought so growing up. Conversations with my grandpa about medicine and, yes, seeing the famed bag with stethoscopes were the spark for myself to pursue a medical career as well. I feel so fortunate Grandpa was there to join me for the critical first steps of that journey. The white coat ceremony to begin medical school, hearing me recite the same Hippocratic oath that he himself recited over 60 years prior. During my cardiology course, discussing with me the physiology, physical exam, and even being the primary person who taught me how to read EKGs. And he loved every minute of it. Being in person at my PhD defense to continue his support for research, and even asking me questions at the dinner after. And on a more personal note, being present at my wedding to Carly almost 2 years ago, where I witnessed the most loving dance I've ever seen as he danced with the love of his life, Grandma, after winning the longest marriage dance. And truly special to my family, he was able to virtually meet our son Christian twice, his great-grandson, whom everyone says looks just like him. Finally, the way Grandpa called me Monkey was a fitting nickname for me, as I cannot imagine a more inspiring individual on whom to model my life and career. I will love him so much and will sorely miss him. Thank you, Grandpa.
Now, the most difficult part of while we're here, and that is the actual burial. And we are here because we didn't want him to be laid to rest alone. It's fitting that he is with loving family and community to extol his virtues, to say what his ongoing legacy is. So in about a moment, we're going to lower the casket and then we'll perform the act of kavura, literally taking earth and covering and protecting the casket. It's our last physical act that we can have to protect this man who meant so much to you and to so many others. So as we do so, I ask if you'll please rise. Adonai Natan, Adonai Lekaki, Hi Shavran Labarach. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher yatza etchem b'tzamo, v'zan v'chacher etchem b'tuvo, v'mit etchem b'din, v'nata b'tochechem chayei olam. Baruch Adonai Dayan ha'emet. We praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who's formed us in the divine image. You've nourished and sustained us in goodness, and you've made us mortal, but you have implanted immortal life within us. We praise you, O God, judge of truth. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני רב להושיע, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, מתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מחמוך בעל גבורות מדו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיים מצמיח ישועה. ברוך אתה אדוני, נטע בתוכנו חיי עולם. Eternal is your might, O God, and all life is your gift. Great is your power to save. With love, you sustain the living. With great compassion, you give life to all. You send help to the falling and healing to the sick. You bring freedom to the captive. And now you keep faith with those who sleep in the dust. We praise you, O God, who has implanted eternal life within us. The first earth that we place is from Jerusalem. It's from Mount Olives, considered the holiest place in which any Jew can be buried. And not everyone can be buried there, but Feldman's has made it so that we can have some of Jerusalem, Mount Olives brought here. So I'll give this to the children first, and then we'll proceed with the Kavura. Hey, grandchildren. Have you read? Never you read. Barbara. Come. Let's put the photograph and the picture in a sacred place so it doesn't get knocked over. Most mitzvot, we rush to do it with expediency and eagerness. Makdimim zirazim la mitzvah, it says in the Talmud. Rise up early to perform a mitzvah. Not this one. This one we do so with a heavy heart. And so the first shovel is forward with the back of the shovel. And only then do we turn it straight up to do what we must do. Say we will not leave this place until we have protected his physical remains. His spirit, his soul is with God and with each of you. But his physical remains we protect now. And so each of you in turn, there's shovels over there and over here. When you're finished shoveling, take the shovel, put it back. The person can do it on their own. Please. This is when the music can play. Now there's like Having the physical remains covered and protected. We now turn our attention to his neshama, his soul. At the beginning with that gust of wind that came through, I mentioned that wind in Hebrew is ruach, spirit. His spirit is a part of the breath of God. And it says in this prayer that we find on that next page, the El Malei Rachamim, Yitzro b'tzor hachayim et nishmato. But his soul, his spirit, his neshama is bound up on the bond of chayim, of life, of God who created all of life, and of chayim, of the living, of you. Each person who remembers another, each person who has had his or her soul touched by another, they are a legacy. They had that legacy, that imprint in their own soul. And so if you're able to please rise, we mentioned Henry's Hebrew name, Herschel Yosef ben Moshe Yosef. El Malei Rachamim Shochein B'Maromim Am Semnocha Nechona Chanfei HaShchina B'Malot Kedoshim Dorim Kezohar Ki Mazhirim Et Nishmat Herschel Yosef ben Moshe V'Sar Shalach Le'olamo B'Gan Eden Tihem Menuchato V'chen Ba'al Rachamim Nastirehu V'Seta Kenafav L'Olamim B'Yitzro HaChayim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato Yanuach V'Shalom Al Mishkavo V'Nomar Amen. Let's say together, O God, exalted and full of compassion, we pray that you will grant perfect peace and eternal comfort in your sheltering presence to the soul of Dr. Henry Joseph Beck. God of mercy, protect his soul forever. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Adonai, you are his portion. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. The Kaddish Tome is on this next page. And keep these, take them with you. I know that the family is going to go back to Anne and Henry's home. Share them. As we have, when you want to say a prayer in memory of Henry, when you want to light that candle, and in subsequent years for Yartzeit or Yizkor, you have this with its photograph and his name and these meditations and this Kaddish as we say it together. Yitkada, the Yitkada Shemei Rabbah, the Alma Devavrat Cherote, the Yamlich Malchute, the Chayachon, the Omeachon, the Chayedechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agalav Izman Kari, the Imru, Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabbah Nevarach Le'olam Ul Almei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach, Yitba'ah, Yitroman v'yitnasu, Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalav, Shemei B'Kudisha, Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, Tushbechata v'nechemata, Le'amiram ba'alma, V'imru, Amen. Yehi Shalama Rabba min Shemayim, V'chayim aleim, Ba'kol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen. Osei Shalom b'nomah, V'ya'asei Shalom, Aleinu v'Kol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen. Tonight begins Purim. It's a festival of joy. When Adar comes in, you say, not to sing Adar, B'Kunim, Sameach. When Adar comes, we increase our happiness. But even at the heart of Purim, you read that there are times of brokenheartedness, of loss, and of threat, and of difficulty. And what did Esther and Mordecai do? They reminded us that God's presence is in our actions, in our heart, and in the way we treat one another. So even with a broken heart and in sadness, we had some of your humor and the good memories that each of you shared. Find the joy that will honor Henry's memory. Find the joy tonight. To tradition also to have a little schnapps on it. Don't have to overdo that. But it is a way of saying, when we lift up that schnapps, we say l'chaim to us. On that last page, we say, for the ties of love that death cannot sever, for the companionship we shared along life's path, for those gifts of heart and mind which have now become a precious heritage. For all this and more, we are grateful. Now help us, O compassionate God, not to dwell on sorrow and pain. Help us instead to find within our hearts the courage to return to the tasks of life and its joys. Amen. May God comfort you, along with all who know in Zion and Jerusalem, the fourth of life, the fourth of peace.